Hello and welcome to the first video in a series that I'm going to do on A-Level History Coursework. So this is the AQA non-examined assessment, and we're going to go through and look at all the different aspects of what you need to do, and I will try and help you along the way, and hopefully having a stock of these videos will give you something you can keep going back to help you get through it all. So very basics in this video. Start off with it's 20% of the final mark, and this is important because it's probably going to be, or should really be, the best performing of your 3 units. So you could do 40% for unit 1, 40% for unit 2, and then 20% for the NEA, the coursework. And so for your qualification, it's important. But more broadly than that, this is something that the universities insisted stayed in A-level history. The coursework didn't stay in all the different A-levels, but it did stay in A-level history. And the reason for that is you're going to learn some researching skills and how to put together essentially your first university essay before actually getting to university. So it is kind of a big deal in terms of the qualification. It's also a big deal in terms of the skills that you're going to learn. All the kind of stuff with researching, selecting material, choosing sources, drafting, redrafting, proofreading. One of the things we'll be looking at particularly will be referencing and footnoting later in the series. And all those different bits, creating a bibliography, creating an appendix, all those different bits will be the kind of things you'll need to do in formal academic essays at university. And so you will be taking those skills with you, having done the coursework in A-level history. Right, so what do you need to do? Well, as I said, this is kind of your basics, your starting point. So you'll get a title or a selection of titles from your teacher. Now it's going to cover about 100 years, 100-ish year time period. You need to understand essentially in the country that you're studying what happens in those 100 years. So to get a good overview, a good understanding, changes in government, particularly if there's a change in style of government or type of government during that period, what kind of impact that's likely to have on the question that you're doing. So you need that broad understanding. So some reading, looking at different materials on that would be a good starting point. You're going to have to evaluate change over time. So that's what you're thinking about as you go through and you start doing your reading, right? So how is what's happening in this bit obviously different to stuff that I've already seen, or as you look at more and more material, how it changes, or indeed how it stays the same. You will need 2 or 3 major themes in answering your question. So we often look at 3, but 3 with the word limits that come in, 3 might be a bit much. You might want to take it down to 2. So you want to show that you're looking at multiple aspects of your question. And that'll give you a more nuanced and interesting argument and judgment. You need to be able to explain and evaluate the views of 2 different historians. This includes looking at the context in which that they wrote and any limitations to their writing. So this is a slightly odd bit which you kind of have to kind of integrate into and what would otherwise be a fairly straightforward looking essay. But it gives you a chance to start developing some of those higher end skills, and it's also the kind of skills you should have been developing in your unit 1, your breadth unit, where you've been looking at historians' views on this. You're not limited to a short extract this time. You can look at a much bigger chunk of a book, or a whole book indeed, if you really want to. So it gives you an opportunity to really kind of get hold of what a historian has argued about the question that you're looking at. But also it's a bit of research into them and go, well, are they like the world's leading expert on this? Is there something controversial in what they said? Did they write this at a particular time period which meant there was going to be certain things that they were likely to reflect and come out in their writing? Do they have a particular viewpoint? Is there something about their background or their perspective that means that they might look at something a little bit one-eyed? So we've got a series of things that you might need to look at and evaluate on that. Now, you also have to use primary sources. You're expected to pick out 3 primary sources. They must be at least 2 different types. So, for example, you can't have 3 speeches or 3 newspaper articles. There should be at least 2 different types in there. Ideally, you want to space them out from across the 100-year period. So you might want something near the middle, something fairly near the beginning, or something near the end. And if you do your different themes, you might want to do it so you've got, if you've got 3 themes, 1 from each theme. If you've got 2 themes, 2 from one theme, 1 from the other. So you're going to have to find historians, and I definitely would talk to your teacher about that. You're going to have to find some primary sources. Again, talk to your teacher, but that might be something you to find that kind of bit that makes you stand out, that makes your essay a bit more special, that you really spend a lot of time going away and looking at, and don't just use the first 3 primary sources you come across. You're going to need to say something insightful about their value in answering your question. And again, these are skills that you will have been developing in your Unit 2, in your depth unit, where you've been looking at primary sources and evaluating their value. Right, so other aspects then. So what is it? One of the big questions students often keep coming back to and asking is, well, what should my essay look like? So ultimately, it should look something like what is on screen. You'll have an introduction. You will define the key elements of your question. You will set some criteria by which you will be able to make your judgment, and you will give your argument right there in your introduction. I do not suggest you write your introduction first. I would leave this to be one of the last things that you do. In fact, I would write the introduction and the overall conclusion together. Now, the one exception to that would be I would have noted down somewhere your criteria, what it is you're going to be using as your judgment once you've done a reasonable amount of your research. You will have a section near the beginning where you will look at the historian's views, and so this might look like start with 4 kind of solid paragraphs, historian A's view, then some evaluation and context and limitations, historian B's view, then another paragraph looking at context and limitations on their view. You'll then go through your themes. Within your themes, you will evaluate change over time. You will look at material and events from across the time period. You will also have a primary source in there somewhere, which you will evaluate for value. And at the end of your theme, you'll have a mini conclusion. So you will repeat that 2 or 3 times. Remember, if you are only going to do it twice, you need to make sure one of those themes has 2 primary sources in it, because you need a total of 3 overall. And then you'll have this overall conclusion of what your argument is. You will also create a bibliography, which is a list of all the books, articles, and websites that you used in alphabetical order. Alphabetical order of the author's surname in terms of articles and books, and then a bibliography, which would just be your websites in alphabetical order. So again, fairly simple task, that one, but one people tend to put off and then becomes a big deal around the time of deadline. You also create an appendix. So in the actual essay itself will be the evaluation of the sources. The sources themselves in their full should sit in your appendix, which you can then refer to in your references. And so when you say source A is valuable because, then the person reading it can go and flick to the appendix and look at source A and go, oh, right, yes, I can see what they're saying, hopefully. Right. Right, how long should it be? There is a maximum of 4,500 words. If you go over that, there is a 5-mark penalty. The marks are only out of 40, so a 5-mark penalty is about a grade. So we want to avoid that. It will sound like a huge amount when you are starting. By the time you get towards the end, it will sound like nowhere near enough, and you will be desperately cutting down words. So it's one of these things to bear in mind. It's only a 4,500 word essay. You are not writing a book, and therefore need to make sure you have a selection of different events and themes and stuff you can look at across, but it does not have to be endless. And I'm sure whatever question you are doing, there will be many historians who have written books on it. You are not writing a book, it's an essay. So it's something to be mindful of and careful of as you're going through. Right, so what are they looking for? So when your teacher marks it and when it goes off to be moderated, what they're looking for is the 3 assessment objectives. Objective 1 is essentially essay skills. Did you know stuff? Were you focused on the question? Is your writing analytical? Is there a clear and coherent and supported judgment running through it? And if you do all those things, it's a bit like writing a history essay. And if you've done those things, you pick up those marks. There is assessment objective 2 is analysis of primary sources and its assessment of value. So do you have 3 primary sources? If you don't, the mark scheme will absolutely crucify you on it. So you make sure you have 3 primary sources. You have to then assess them for value, and the number of marks you'll get will depend on how good a job you've done of assessing that. And objective 3 is about evaluation of historians' views. So how well do you understand their view, just like doing a question 1 on paper 1, and then also your evaluation of their view and your evaluation of the context and limitations in terms of their writing. Right, and if you do all that perfectly, you'll get 40 out of 40. Doesn't sound too bad, does it? Right. Thank you for watching. Please share, subscribe, and I'll be going through all different aspects of the coursework in a series of videos that follow on from this one. Thank you very much.